I saw that Gary got my little joke a while ago about Jalen Hurt. I don't know how many of y'all keep up with football, but one of the blessings of watching this young man do the incredible of coming back to beat Georgia, of which I won't say where my sentiments lay in all of that, living in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. But was after it was over with, they had the announcer there that was talking to him, asked him, he said, how were you able to come in and just take over the game like that when you haven't even played all season? And he really hadn't. He started the season, but he just came in at this last moment because Tua got hurt. And you know what his reply was? I just put it in the hands of the Lord. Wasn't that neat? What a great opportunity to give a testimony. I mean, they've already just said how great this guy was in terms of what he did and what he accomplished. But even as young as he was, he responded to that in that way. I just put it in the hands of the Lord. That's a pretty good lesson for all of us. This Sunday is the Sunday of Hope. It is in the Advent calendar, the first Sunday of Advent, and traditionally called the Sunday of Hope. So I want us to look at this Advent story as it begins for us, and the birth narratives of Jesus as part of this story is told for us in Luke, the first chapter, verses 5 through 25. We'll read it together. There was in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well advanced in years. So it was that while he was serving as priest before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people was praying outside at the hour of incense. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. He will also be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And Zacharias said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is well advanced in years. And the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stand in the presence of God, and was sent to speak to you and to bring you these glad tidings. Which is basically the equivalent of, who do you think I am, the Avon lady? But behold, you will be mute and not able to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their own time." And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he lingered so long in the temple. But when he came out, he could not speak to them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned to them and remained speechless. So it was, as soon as the days of his service were completed, that he departed to his own house. Now, after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and she hid herself 5 months, saying, "Thus the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among people." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I want to introduce you to some characters in our Christmas story and one of the narratives of the Christmas story. And I hope that in some way, some of the way the story is told will be revealed to us in the names of these who are the characters. The first one I introduce to you is Zacharias. You see, there is something in a name. You know, the poet wrote, "What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." And I suppose a skunk by any other name would stink as bad, you know. But what is the case in a name? Well, actually, I believe the Spirit of the Lord is saying something to us in the name of this priest. You see, this is the first name given to us in the Christmas story, is Zacharias. For over 400 years, there has been prophetic silence in Israel, from the time of Malachi to the time of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, that there is complete silence of a prophetic nature. And the people have begun to wonder, has the Lord forgotten us? Does he remember us? When we think of the age of America, it's only a little over 200 years old. What would it be like if 400 years had passed and there had been complete silence for the nation that God had established, Israel? Well, maybe God has forgotten us, Israel might have thought. What does the name Zacharias mean? In the Hebrew, it is the Lord remembers. The Lord has remembered his people. And so the beginning of the Christmas story is with a priest who is now ministering before the Lord, and he is burning incense before the Lord. Now, we don't have time to go into all the details of how special this was. I will only mention that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There were so many priests in Israel during that day, and they were basically given a lottery to who would be in charge of this particular act within the temple, and they were called from all over Israel to come. And so it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Zacharias to do this. And not only would he get the privilege of burning incense before the Lord for Israel, but he would be given the opportunity to come out and to speak to the people. Now, what minister would not relish that opportunity? It would be the equivalent of Billy Graham saying, "I'm hoarse, would you come preach for me?" You know, we're doing this big crusade of 50,000 or 100,000 people or whatever. Yeah, let me think about it, you know. Well, that's what happened to Zacharias. And yet, because Zacharias did not believe God, he lost his ability to speak. You see, there's silence in unbelief. Even David, when he had committed the sin with Bathsheba and he had to confess before the Lord his sinfulness and the sin against Uriah and his blasphemy against the Lord, he had to confess all of this. He said, "Restore unto me the joy of my salvation, then will I teach transgressors their ways, and sinners will be converted unto thee." I have nothing to say, David said, just as Zacharias had nothing to say, because he asked for a sign. I would think that the angel of the Lord standing there beside him in the temple as he was offering up incense would be enough of a sign, wouldn't you? But because he didn't believe the very messenger of God, he lost his ability to speak. And so when his opportunity came to come out of the temple and to speak to the people, he opened his mouth and nothing came out. But can you imagine having this experience and wanting to tell somebody? He couldn't tell them. So he gestured to them wildly, and they said, "Well, we think he's seen something. We don't know what it is because he's obviously has a problem here. He can't speak." And that's exactly what happened to Zacharias. Now, let's look at his wife, Elizabeth. What does the name Elizabeth mean? Elizabeth means God keeps his promises. It means the Lord is my promise. I trust in the Lord, basically. So whereas the husband in the story, Zacharias, has his doubts and doesn't believe what the messenger of God has said to him, Elizabeth does. Because Elizabeth knows that the Lord keeps his promises. There's another name in the story, and that is the name John. In fact, it was this name that got my attention, that made me wonder why we should look at other names. Because, Gabriel is going to tell Mary, "You shall call this child Jesus." And then just as he has told Zechariah that you will call this child John. Now, what is so spectacular about that? When the time comes to name the child, everybody wants to call this child Zacharias, Zacharias Jr. But Zacharias, he can't respond, he can't speak. And Elizabeth says, "No, you're going to call him John." Because apparently Zacharias has somehow been able to convey to Elizabeth, maybe in writing or something, telling his story, but John is the child's name. And you know what the neighbors say? This is quite telling. They say, "Why should we name him John? Because there is none other in your family by that name." Why? Because the name John means God is gracious. God is gracious. I want to tell you, my friends, there is no power on earth greater than God's grace. Paul said, "Where sin did abound, grace did superabound." And this one who is going to be the forerunner of Jesus Christ is going to be the one who is going to declare to the world, even by his name, that God is gracious. So prior to John, that was not a common name in Israel. And after that, it has become the most common, at one time, the most common in the English language. John. And you should call his name John. Well, as we look at this wonderful story, this part of the birth narratives, we see Zechariah, the Lord has remembered. We see Elizabeth, God keeps his promise. We see John, God is gracious. Because the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And there is no power on earth greater than the grace of God. Sin reigned over man, but the hope of Advent is told in this story as we are reminded that where sin did abound, grace did much more abound, because the greatest power in this world is grace. Let us prepare to receive the grace of God, not only as we have received the grace of God in his word, but as we now share together in the grace of God through the sacrament of the body and blood of Jesus Christ.